So what we know about religion and morality, we know from comparing small and large-scale societies. Small-scale societies differ from large-scale societies by being cultures that are more likely to impart unique social norms about what qualifies as moral or honorable behavior for an individual and a group. And we looked at some ways that the concept of honor has influenced thinking and behavior in the moral domain, including normalizing violence and subjugation of groups of people. We focused on the research program of Richard Nisbett first, and this is a psychologist team, Richard Nisbett and Dick Cohen, and they took on a case study of violence in the American South. Both Southerners and Northerners, and those outside the US looking in, commonly observe a difference between Southerners and Northerners in their propensity for violence. And Nisbett wanted to know whether there really was a greater propensity for violence in the South, and if so, why that was. He started out presenting his explanation for this long observed phenomenon with a hope that it would rule out some previous explanations that just weren't satisfying. One of those being temperature. There were associations between hot climates, high temperatures, and violence, including homicide and other injuries. And Nisbett considered this a spurious correlation. Second, the role of poverty has long been linked to violence, and the South is generally not as economically prosperous. So it's been suggested that poverty fully explains Southern violence and the increased Southern violence compared to the North. Finally, the North and South historically had opposing positions on slavery. Scholars theorize that their historic use of slave labor caused white people in the South to view violence as more normal and acceptable. So Nisbett is going to pursue a different explanation. In addition to their use of slave labor, their poverty, and the high temperatures, Nisbett proposes that the South inherited a culture of honor. And this was derived from social, cultural, economic factors that entail patterns of violence in order for the culture to exist. So he's not making a claim about the South alone. He uses the South as an example of a culture of honor with economic determinants that can be seen the world over. In the South, Nisbett discusses the presence of herding economies and this historic effect on a culture of honor. Because livestock was more fitting for the rough landscape than just farming, these immigrants tended to rely on herding economies, and they were really vulnerable if they were raided or robbed. Their whole livelihood could be quickly lost. So any threats made them more likely to show strong shows of aggression and also to defend themselves ferociously. And unlike farming communities, which really need to work together over many seasons, passive forms of aggression and rules and contracts, the rule of law, they're just not as effective. But to understand how honor cultures function today, Nisbett needed to pull together several kinds of data. And so like Noren Zion did in his study of religion, he started out with sociological data, looking at rates of capital punishment and policies and laws, including the Stand Your Ground law. He looked at self-report and eventually experimental data. The important sociological data, it did support the hypothesis that Southern culture is related to increasing acceptability of violence in general. And it motivated Nisbett to go further. And his research program is known for the results of the experiments. Nisbett hypothesized that insults in particular fuel culture of honor violence. So to investigate this, he delivered insults to participants who were from the South and from the North. There was an experimental framework which had conditions with 3 Confederates, which is really difficult, and one person is placed, Confederate is placed at a filing cabinet. And then there was a Confederate at either end of a hallway where the cabinet was. The participant had to make his way up and down the hallway, which meant passing the Confederate at the filing cabinet twice. And this forced the Confederate to have to shut his cabinet door, stop what he's doing, let him by twice. And the second time he actually mutters, "asshole," and bumps the participant. And the Confederates that are placed at the either end of the hall, they make their observations of his reaction to getting bumped and called in the name calling. What they found were a range of results, some of which were null for some of their dependent variables, including their word fragment completion task and their photo-emotional identification task. What they did find, though, was that regional background differences were found in reaction to being insulted. So these are the Confederates at the either end of the hall are observing the participant. And what they saw was that when they went to analyze the data, 65% of the people who were from the North appeared pretty amused about this happening. They could laugh, compared to only 15% of the Southerners. So the large majority of the Southern participants were not amused. And later on, the researchers followed up on these results, and they used an interesting covert methodology to study aggression. And it's the same behavioral design as the filing cabinet study, but they added a pre-bump and post-bump measurement of hormones, cortisol and testosterone. And you've probably encountered these in other psych classes or bio. Cortisol is cortisol measurement can be an index of physiological stress for researchers of psychology. Likewise, testosterone changes can be interpreted as a measure of preparedness for aggression. And so they measured these with saliva samples taken at the study lab. This study provides good evidence that there's a difference in the response of Southerners and Northerners to insult at the physiological level of stress and aggression. So for, as you can see in this graph here, the culture of honor subjects would be the Southerners and the non-culture of honor subjects would be the Northerners. And in the graph on the left, cortisol levels rose 79% for insulted Southerners in red, compared to a 42% increase for the control Southerners. Compare this to the Northerners in blue. They saw no effect on the cortisol from the insults. So we're looking at 33% compared to 39% for the Northerners, the increase. The insult also had an effect on testosterone for the Southerners. They rose 12% for the insulted Southerners compared to just a 4% increase for the control Southerners. And for Northern participants, a 4 to 6% increase was observed across the control and insult conditions. So the effects of insults and Southernness on these physiological indicators of stress and aggression, they really help to bolster the argument that Southerners, as people from cultures of honor, do have a propensity for aggression and violence in a way that Northerners may not. Here's a question. Over many years, Nisbet and his colleagues investigated whether violence is really more prevalent in the South and whether it is linked to the South being a culture of honor. Which of the following would be most likely to trigger aggression in a culture of honor based on this research? 1, a lack of social decorum. 2, dirtiness or squalor. 3, insulting behavior. 4, deliberately causing disorder. The correct answer here is 3, insulting behavior. So aggressive responses to insults are what characterize cultures of honor. People in cultures of honor might also be more interested in reducing disorder and purity, so trying to reduce squalor, dirtiness, and increase social decorum. But what cultures of honor are known for is the trigger to aggression and violence from insults.